Hey guys, tonight we're heading to a place where the wind smells like salt, the forests are too quiet, and the truth took over a decade to crawl out of the underbrush. In the quiet coastal town of Clearwater Bay, Oregon, two young women both chasing dreams, both gone too soon. Left behind stories that never quite let go. You're about to walk through one of them. It starts on a rainy afternoon. You've been out too long. The sky is a slate gray bruise, and the windshield wipers tick like a heartbeat, trying too hard to keep up. When you pull into the driveway, something's wrong. You can't say why at first. It's that sixth sense, the one that's more weather vane than logic. The lights in the house are still on. The baby's wailing faintly from inside, but your wife, Jessica, isn't waiting by the door. She isn't anywhere. You try her cell, nothing. You check the neighbor's note. Her car is gone, but she hadn't planned to take the baby. Inside, a half-drunk cup of coffee sits on the counter. There's steam still faintly curling from the microwave. Jessica's coat is missing, but her house keys are here. And there's something weird about the silence, like the walls are waiting for someone to scream, and still no sign of her. Jessica Moreau, 23, curly hair, half smile, a little shy unless she's behind a camera. She used to study computer science in Louisiana before she followed you to Oregon. It was supposed to be temporary. You were the musician. She was the steady one. But then she paused her studies to raise your son, tried to find work, odd gigs, some babysitting, and eventually modeling. Now, modeling sounds glamorous until you're in it. The truth is, most local gigs pay in pizza slices and photo credits. Jessica had the look, soft features, a relatable face as one photographer called it, but she wasn't tall enough for runway. Still, the work kept her busy and hopeful. You find a note scribbled on the back of a grocery list, Studio 2 p.m. Cascade or ask for Brett. You don't know a Brett. You also don't remember Jessica mentioning this shoot, but maybe she forgot to text. Maybe she got caught in traffic. Maybe. You call the number on the note, no answer. You leave a message. You feed the baby. You pace the kitchen. By nightfall, you're practically chewing your nails. And that's when your phone rings. "Hey," says a calm voice. "Jessica left her notebook here. Thought you might want to come grab it." You freeze. "Where's Jessica?" A pause. "Didn't she come home?" The man hangs up before you can ask more. You drive to the address in the note, an old industrial building turned art studio. It's locked, empty, no lights on. You knock, call, bang, nothing. A dusty sandwich board out front still advertises holiday portrait specials. You go to the police. They take your statement, but they have heard this kind of story before. Adults disappear all the time. Maybe she ran off. Maybe she needed space. The fact that she left the baby behind. People panic. The officer shrugs. You go home. The house feels colder. The baby won't sleep. You can't either. 3 days later, the forest catches fire. Okay, not the whole forest, just a car. The firefighters find it early in the morning up in the Cascade Ridge foothills, near a forgotten trailhead, a silver sedan, scorched to the frame, burned out but not yet collapsed. The VIN number matches Jessica's car, but the fire ate everything else. If you've never smelled burned plastic and wet moss, consider yourself lucky. There's something so final about it, like the forest itself is trying to erase a mistake. The trunks melted. The seats, gone. No license plate, no clothes, no sign of Jessica. And still, the police aren't convinced it's foul play. One officer suggests maybe she fell asleep at the wheel. Another mentions insurance fraud. You feel like you're going crazy. Weeks pass. The notebook never turns up. Brett never calls back. And Jessica's just gone. This is the part of the story where everything goes still. Days stretch. The baby grows. You wait. You hope. You stop hoping. You try again, and then, a strange twist of fate. A volunteer search team looking for a lost hiker stumbles on something odd in the underbrush. A necklace, then a cracked phone case, then bones, partial remains, scattered and moss-covered. Forensic teams arrive with their brush kits and clipboards. You're asked to provide dental records, which is as gutting as it sounds. A few weeks later, the call comes. It's her. That's how Jessica Moreau becomes one of Clearwater Bay's mysteries. But at this point, nobody suspects it's not the only one. Fun fact, Oregon is home to more than 30,000 square miles of forest, much of it densely unpatrolled. And here's something weirder: historians still argue whether early 20th century logging towns deliberately underreported missing persons to avoid scaring away settlers. And your quirky fact for tonight? In 1979, a Portland artist tried to launch a fireproof photography business, claiming he could make photo paper that wouldn't burn. Spoiler, it absolutely did. Anyway, you try to move on. The forest seems to hold its breath, and Jessica's story isn't done with you yet. The voice on the phone still haunts you, not because it sounded threatening, no. It was too calm for that. It was the ease with which he said her name. Like he knew her well. Like it wasn't strange at all that your wife hadn't come home and he somehow had her notebook. But she never kept a notebook. You remember that the next morning, groggy from another night of pacing with a fussy baby, as you look again at the kitchen table, the list: grocery, diapers, Cascade on ask for. Brett isn't in her handwriting. You'd missed that yesterday. Or maybe you just didn't want to see it. You show it to the police. They agree, finally, to open a formal investigation. Jessica's disappearance is now officially suspicious. A burned car in the forest helps push that decision along. But without hard evidence, they're stuck. There's no clear motive, no known suspects, no body, at least not yet. So the case stalls until two hikers wander off trail one spring afternoon nearly a year later. They're looking for mushrooms, not the magic kind chanterelles, the edible gold of Pacific Northwest foraging. They're halfway up a mossy incline, where the ferns are waist-high and the air smells like rotting pine cones, when they find something strange, a flash of gold in the dirt. Then a shoe, then a jawbone. The gold is an earring. You recognize it immediately from the photo pinned to the missing poster. Tiny hoops with a heart etched into the side. A birthday gift from her mother. Dental records seal the rest. Jessica Moreau had been in those woods the entire time. The forest changes after that. Not in any real way. You still hear chickadees and see squirrels scrambling across fallen logs, but the mood shifts. Cascade Ridge doesn't feel like a place for hiking anymore. It becomes a memorial, a mystery, and, eventually, a warning. The forensic team finds a few more fragments of bone, but no full skeleton, no clothing either. The fire probably destroyed most of what she had. What the animals didn't scatter, the rain slowly buried. There's nothing left to say, or so you think. The local papers covered the discovery with cautious headlines. Remains identified near Cascade Ridge. Moreau case reclassified. A few whispers float through town. Some say Jessica must have gotten lost. Others suggest she was set up. No one agrees. But then, late one evening, your phone rings again. It's an unknown number. You let it go to voicemail. Then listen, holding your breath. "Hey, just wondering if you ever found that notebook," says a male voice. Same smooth cadence. "I cleaned the studio last week. Found a sweater. 2. Thought it might be hers." You report the voicemail. The number's dead. Disconnected. The police trace what they can. Still no solid lead. The studio, if it ever existed, has long been emptied. No leases under Brett. No registered businesses near that address. Like someone scrubbed the place clean before it could be checked. Still, a few officers start taking things seriously. They look at similar cases, other women who went missing near modeling shoots. They start building a map, noting the details, but it's all too little, too late. Jessica's killer. He vanishes like smoke. Want a weird tidbit? In the early 1900s, Oregon's Cascade forests were rumored to be patrolled by so-called timber ghost figures that protected the woods from logging intruders. Some loggers swore they heard whispering at night, warning them to leave. It's the kind of lore that sticks when a place just feels off. And while we're at it, here's your mainstream historical fact. The FBI didn't begin using centralized criminal profiling until the 1970s. And even now, serial predator cases involving multiple unconnected suspects are surprisingly rare. Which brings us to the next chapter, though you don't know it yet. Because Jessica isn't the last, and just a few years later, in the same eerie stretch of misty roads and whispering woods, another woman vanishes, and this time, it's even messier. But back in 2001, you're still clinging to pieces. A memorial service, a half-empty photo album, A child who won't remember his mother, but who still curls up at night with the pink scarf she used to wear. The worst part, you don't even know if justice is possible. People still talk about the burned car, the photo shoot that may never have existed, the calm voice in the studio that dissolved like fog, and that notebook. Always that notebook, the one Jessica never owned, the one you never found, the one that still feels like bait. You start dreaming of fire, of twisting roads, of headlights disappearing into the trees. You wonder how long she knew something was wrong. You wouldn't think a modeling gig would be the kind of thing that ends in a forest fire. But that's the weird thing about dreams. They look shiny from a distance, just headshots and ring lights, wind machines and little flashes of applause, but up close, they're complicated, sharp-edged, sometimes cruel. Jessica had only just begun dipping into that world. She wasn't a runway queen or some billboard regular. No high-fashion designer ever called her name. But for local catalogs, small businesses, the odd tourism brochure she had, that approachable look, the kind that made people want to trust her. It helped that she smiled with her eyes, not just her mouth. It started the way these things always do, with one test shoot, a friend of a friend, a Craigslist ad, a faded studio near the coast. Then came another job. This one for a chain of boutiques that needed fresh headshots for their window posters. Then a car dealership flyer. A little money came in. Nothing huge. But hope does strange things when you're trying to make rent and still pay for diapers. She got that last gig, the Cascade one, through a tip from another model at a coffee shop downtown. The woman said she'd worked with Brett once. Professional, super chill, great eye for lighting. She said, kinda quiet, but harmless. But there was something about the way she said harmless, like she'd already rehearsed it. You remember Jessica hesitating that morning. Not visibly, not dramatically, just a flicker. A small delay in her goodbye. She kissed your forehead, said she'd be back by dinner, told you to give the baby a bath before 6. Then she reached for her umbrella, looked out at the rain, and said, I hope he's not one of the weird ones. You think about that for weeks. It turns out, modeling has always had a weird ones problem. Even back in the early 1900s, traveling photographers would set up shop in small towns, advertising portraits and beauty contests. Some were legit, others were not. Historians still argue whether these contests were harmless entertainment or veiled recruitment for less savory purposes. The blurred line between art and exploitation, that's not a new debate. Jessica knew that. She wasn't naive, but she also wasn't cynical, not yet. She believed in second chances. She gave people the benefit of the doubt. That's what scared you the most? The studio on Cascade Road? If that's even where she went, never shows up in property records. Not under that name. Not under Brett's. It's like someone took scissors to the paper trail. Clean cut. No tape. No smudge of glue. You retrace her steps over and over. The cafe she stopped at that morning. The gas station she used the rewards card at. The traffic cam footage that, if you squint, shows her silver sedan heading east toward the hills. That's where the trail ends. Or, at least, that's where it pauses. Because someone else, years later, will take a nearly identical path. But not yet. Right now, it's just you, a baby that keeps pointing to the front door at odd hours, and a kitchen drawer full of modeling comp cards you can't bring yourself to throw away. Do you want tonight's odd historical tidbit? In the 1950s, one Oregon photographer made waves when he claimed to use auras instead of lighting to photograph models. He said their energy shaped the shadows. His clients swore by him until 3 of them vanished in 1 year. Police never proved anything, but he quietly closed shop and moved to Arizona. Somehow, that doesn't make you feel better. You attend a few grief support groups. One woman talks about her husband disappearing during a fishing trip. Another man says his daughter went to Portland for a music festival and never came back. The thing that links you all is the silence. The way the world forgets after the posters come down, after the media moves on, after no one calls back. But then, someone does. A woman named Lena reaches out through a private message. She says she modeled in Clearwater Bay years ago, says she had a shoot with Brett, says he gave her the creeps. He was too quiet. She writes, like a wax figure. Cold hands, smiled too late. She never went back. You forward her message to the police. They say thank you. They file it away. It's the first time you hear someone else speak Jessica's unspoken fear aloud. The problem is, by then, Brett if that's even his real name, has already slipped through the cracks. He left behind no prints, no business license, no confirmed address, just a handful of women who remember the way he looked at them like he already owned the ending. Clearwater Bay's modeling community gets quieter after that. Shoots slow down. Word spreads. The phrase, "don't go to Cascade alone," starts to echo in group chats and hallway whispers. You start carrying Jessica's old comp card in your wallet, the one where she's looking straight at the camera, wind in her curls, like she sees something you don't. Maybe she did? It's summer when the hikers find her. You almost miss the news, just a short blip on the local channel, wedged between a segment on a record-breaking zucchini and a feature about the county fair. Partial remains located in Cascade Ridge National Forest. The anchor says, "Identification pending." You already know, there's this thing your brain does when it's been holding grief for too long. It tries to go numb. So when you hear the news, you don't fall apart. You don't shout. You just turn down the volume and watch the steam rise from your cup of tea. Jessica's favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle and fading picture of a cartoon owl. The next day, detectives come by. They ask for her dental records again and a list of her piercings, scars, tattoos, any small detail that could help. You don't want to hand it over, but you do. You still want answers. 3 weeks later, you get them. Her jawbone, a small necklace, and the hoops, those little heart-etched earrings her mom gave her the year she turned 20. She wore them that morning, even though you teased her for always choosing the same pair. It's official now. Jessica Moreau is no longer missing. She's dead. But the investigation doesn't jump forward like you hoped. It crawls. Carefully, with gloves and tweezers and slow-motion bureaucracy, they comb the woods for more evidence. But the rain, animals, and time have already done their part. Her body's been scattered. A few ribs found nearly 30 feet away. Her shoes both gone. There's no clear cause of death, which means there's no murder charge. It's an open case. Technically, but it's as if the air has been let out of it. The big dramatic reveal you braced for never comes. No suspect is hauled away. No courtroom closes the curtain. Jessica just vanishes a second time. This time from public memory, but not yours. And not Elena Wright's, because Elena, her story comes next. She's different from Jessica. Blonde, tall, loud in the way that makes people think she's fearless. A former cheerleader who transitioned into promo modeling after college, Elena's known for working car shows, wine tastings, tech expos. She's got that easy charm that makes sponsors want her holding their product. And she never, ever travels without texting her location. Until she does. It's late spring, 2004. 3 years since Jessica, Elena leaves Portland for what she describes in a voicemail as a cushy auto gig. Some guy wants shots of me test driving a convertible near the cliffs. Her roommate says she seemed excited, said the pay was good, too good. Her last known sighting is in the back of a red Jaguar, parked near a gas station off Highway 6. Surveillance footage shows her stepping out to get a snack, sour worms, and a cherry soda. Then she vanishes, just like Jessica. Want a weird fact? Historians still argue whether the rise of promotional modeling in the early 2000s empowered young women or made them easier to target. It gave freedom, sure, but also demanded they work alone, move fast, trust strangers, smile for anyone with a camera. That surveillance tape is released to the public. For weeks, it loops across local TV. Have you seen Elena Wright? She's smiling, always smiling. You want to shout at the screen, tell her to run, but she never hears you. And now for a fringe tidbit. In 2003, a group of amateur sleuths in Washington claimed they could predict disappearances using a map of ley lines and lunar patterns. They linked cases to specific forest sites, claiming the Earth absorbed trauma. One of their red flags, Cascade Ridge. Make of that what you will. Back to Elena. When she doesn't show up to her next job, friends report her missing. And this time, the police actually listen. Maybe it's the clean record. Maybe it's the matching timeline. Or maybe it's because the last person seen with her is already in their database. A freelance photographer named Derek Fields. You hear his name on the news one night. You nearly drop your fork. Derek, not Brett. But the pieces start clicking. The same smooth voice, the same cold eyes, different name, same act. He ran a mobile studio, advertised online. No paper trail, again. But this time, He slips up because when the police knock on his door, he doesn't lawyer up. He starts talking too much. He claims it was an accident. Elena fell during a driving segment, hit her head, and panicked. He says he buried her in a shallow grave because he was scared of being blamed. A dumb mistake, he insists. But the autopsy shows broken ribs, defensive wounds, bruising around the neck. None of it matches a fall. All of it screams control. He tries to walk it back, but it's too late. He leads police to her body, buried under loose soil and moss about 15 miles from where Jessica was found. It's not the same spot, but it's close enough that the forest starts feeling like a repeat offender. Derek Fields is arrested. He's charged, and this time, there's no gentle fade to silence. The trial begins in the fall. The courtroom is packed. You go, sit in the back. You don't speak. You don't need to. The look on his face when they read the verdict, that's enough. Life, no parole. It should feel like closure, but it doesn't. Because now you wonder, was he the only one? You would think that locking away one predator would let the air back into the room, but it doesn't. Because for every question answered, 3 more crawl out from under the floorboards. Derek Fields confessed to burying Elena Wright. He said the shoot went wrong, claimed panic, claimed regret, but the facts didn't match the words. And the forensics told a different story, one written in bruises and fractures. Yet when it came to Jessica, Derek never said a word. He didn't know her, had never worked with her, had never even been to Cascade Ridge, he said. And oddly enough, the police agreed. He had no alibi, but no direct link either. His name never appeared in any early paperwork. His email address was different. He was living 2 towns over when Jessica vanished. Too many puzzle pieces just didn't fit. So either he was lying, or worse, he wasn't the only one. It's not the kind of idea you want to believe. That 2 predators, entirely unrelated, operated within a 30-mile radius in small-town Oregon. It doesn't make sense. But sometimes, life doesn't bother with sense. Sometimes it just hands you chaos and says, here, cope. That's when the real paranoia sets in. Local modeling circles begin swapping spreadsheets, names, aliases, numbers. Girls warn each other about red flags. Anyone who wants to meet in a remote location, anyone who doesn't have a real studio address, anyone who only pays in cash, an informal network is born. And through it, more stories bubble up. Women who remember Brett, others who recall a photographer who insisted on forest lighting because it made the skin look softer, a man who talked too slow, who never blinked when he smiled. Some of those stories come with near misses models who bailed at the last minute, others with strange disappearances from neighboring counties that no one ever connected to Cascade Ridge. Until now, historians still argue whether small-town America in the early 2000s had the infrastructure to properly track predators working under multiple aliases. Spoiler, it didn't. You find yourself Googling more than you should. You start seeing connections where there might not be any. You find a blog post from 2002 about a B. Keller photography, but the site's long gone, only accessible through archived screenshots. You stare at the name, Keller. It doesn't hit right away. Not until a news segment, years later, shows you the face behind the name. David Keller. Different man, different town. But his name is about to crawl its way into Jessica's case like a splinter that's been hiding under the skin for a decade. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Back in 2004, Elena's case feels like the end, at least to the public. The court gave a verdict. There was a trial. A villain was caged. The media moved on. You didn't, because you still had the voice. You still remembered the notebook, and the fire, and the earrings. And none of that ever led to Derek Fields. Here's your odd tidbit of the night. In 1986, a Japanese psychologist coined the term hikikomori to describe people who withdraw from society entirely. No work, no school, no contact. A surprising number of freelance photographers in the early internet age exhibited similar behavior. Studio in the basement, 0 friends, dozens of headshots. Sometimes the camera is a window, sometimes it's a cage. And tonight's history fact: forensic linguistics. The study of language as legal evidence was first used in a major U.S. criminal case in 1995. It helped identify a killer based solely on phrasing and word choice, the way someone speaks. It's a fingerprint all its own. That voice on your voicemail, you still remember it. Every syllable, you start thinking about timelines. If Derek didn't kill Jessica, then who did? And why did he mirror the setup so precisely? Same kind of job, same forest, same distance from town. Copycat. Coincidence. Somebody watching. You run into Elena's sister at a memorial fundraiser one afternoon. She's tall like Elena was, but softer around the eyes. She asks if you've ever felt like they're both part of someone's portfolio. You laugh, but it isn't funny, because once you see the pattern, it's hard to unsee it. Two women, same ambition, similar builds, local gigs, rural roads, both end up in the same stretch of woods. One killer confesses, the other still out there, or maybe long gone. Maybe standing behind someone else's lens, maybe watching from somewhere quiet, camera in hand, waiting for another harmless conversation to start. You try to let it go, but you can't. Because at night, you still dream of headlights in fog, of a camera clicking just out of view, of someone telling your wife, it's just one more shot, just stand a little deeper into the woods. It's funny what sticks. You don't remember what you were wearing the day Jessica disappeared. You barely remembered the weather other than the rain. Always the rain, but you remember her goodbye. The way her hand hovered just a second too long over the doorknob. That subtle pause, the smallest flinch. And then, like someone pressed play again, she was gone. Now, nearly a decade later, someone presses rewind. You're at work, pretending to focus on the spreadsheet in front of you. When your phone buzzes, a blocked number. You almost let it go, but something makes you pick up. It's a detective. New voice, new department. He says he wants to ask you a few questions about the Jessica Moreau case. You blink, stare at the screen. You think it must be a mistake. Jessica's case has been cold for years. Nobody calls about cold cases unless something changed. Turns out, something did. A woman named Chelsea Lint had recently contacted the local sheriff's department. She said her ex-boyfriend, David Keller, used to brag when he was drunk, not about money, not about cars, about women, specifically about a girl with curly hair. He said he took care of near Cascade Ridge back in 2001. Your stomach drops. Chelsea tells detectives he described the forest in detail. The slope, the rock outcropping, the way the trees twisted like they were listening. He said the girl's car made a nice fire, that it looked beautiful, like a lantern in the trees. They bring her in. She signs an affidavit. She's scared, but firm. She left Keller years ago after one night too many ended with a bruised shoulder and a shattered ashtray. But that story he told, it stuck. The police pull up David Keller's record. It's not clean. Assault, stalking, a sexual harassment charge dropped by a terrified coworker who moved out of state. He served time for unlawful restraint, got out in 2011, changed his number, moved around. Quiet since, until now. They call you in to look at photos, you recognize him. Not from real life, but from a flyer, a print out that Jessica brought home once, tucked in her handbag. New photographer looking for fresh faces. Cascade shoots moody forest lighting preferred. She had rolled her eyes, said, "This guy's a little pretentious." Huh? You agreed, then forgot. Until now. And here's a curious fact. The FBI did not begin compiling comprehensive data on freelance photography businesses until the late 2000s. Before that, practically anyone with a camera and a Craigslist ad could operate unregulated. David Keller used 3 business names between 1999 and 2002. None of them were registered. None left a trace. Chelsea describes something else. She says Keller had a photo album, an old school kind, leather-bound, pages glued at the edges. Inside, she swears she saw pictures of women, some clothed, some not, all with a weird, forced stillness, like they'd been made to pose, some sleeping, some maybe just pretending to be. When she flipped to one page, she remembers a woman with soft features, tan skin, and curly hair pulled back in a scrunchie. She's 90% sure it was Jessica. The police never recover the album. Keller claims it doesn't exist. He says Chelsea's making it up because she wants attention. But he says something else, too. When they ask him if he's ever been to Cascade Ridge, he answers too fast. No, never. Don't hike. Hate the outdoors. Funny, because a photo of him pops up on an old trail blog, Grainy. Sure, but definitely him, smiling awkwardly, squinting at the sun, standing next to a burned stump not far from the ridge. And your fringe detail of the night. In the 1920s, Oregon loggers had a superstition that burned trees could trap a soul if someone died nearby. They'd mark the tree with red paint and never cut it down. Some even claimed to hear whispering when they passed. Makes you wonder what that stump near Keller whispered. Investigators dig deeper. They compare the fire in Jessica's car to 2 other arsons from that same month. One near a ranger station, one behind an old lumber shed. All unsolved. All using the same accelerant kerosene mixed with brake fluid. They ask you for anything else. Any note, any voicemail, and you remember the voice. That odd, calm message. She left her notebook here. You dig through an old laptop, find a backup. You still have it. They bring in a forensic linguist. Remember that weird fact last section? It comes back now. The linguist compares Keller's interview patterns to the voicemail, the timing, the phrasing, the slight drop in tone before the word notebook. And while it's not DNA, it's compelling. Enough to bring him in. They arrest David Keller on suspicion of murder. He doesn't confess. He scoffs, says it's all made up. But his ex-girlfriend's statement, the fire pattern, the linguistics, the matching details, they're enough. This time, the courtroom's quieter. There's no media frenzy like with Elena. Jessica's case is too old. But it doesn't matter. You're there. When they read the charges, you're watching. Life sentence. Again, no parole. Again, justice. Sort of. But also, no, because Jessica is still gone. Here's tonight's historical fact. Oregon was one of the last states to implement mandatory homicide case reviews for cold files, only doing so officially in 2009, years after Jessica's case had already gone cold. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Justice wasn't denied, just delayed. By 10 long, echoing years, the courtroom empties slowly. Chairs scrape against linoleum. A bailiff coughs somewhere. A vending machine buzzes to life with a whir that feels strangely loud in the stillness. You remain seated. You don't know why. Maybe it's because standing up makes it real. Maybe because walking away feels like admitting it's finished and it never will be. David Keller doesn't look back as he's let out. That should be the end of it. But it isn't, because now you're left with the strange puzzle of 2 separate killers, 2 different methods, 2 eerily similar victims. The coincidences pile up until they don't feel like coincidences at all. You sit at home later that week and sketch it out on a yellow legal pad. Names, dates, places, 2 webs, knotted in the same patch of Oregon forest. One killer says he panicked. One never says anything at all. Historians still argue whether criminal minds follow patterns or evolve out of randomness. Is violence like a mold, something that grows under the right damp, hidden conditions? Or is it more like a virus, spreading when no one's watching? Either way, Clearwater Bay caught 2 strains. Let's talk about that town for a minute. Clearwater Bay used to be postcard pretty, a slow harbor with clappered diners, and a main street lined with antique shops and saltwater taffy. You remember weekend art fairs, fiddle music outside the bakery, the smell of clam chowder and lavender soap. Jessica once said it felt like a town waiting for a novel to happen. Now, it feels like a novel that's already been written and torn up halfway through. Tourism dried up after Elena's case made national news. Modeling agencies quietly relocated. Even wedding photographers stopped booking forest backdrops. People didn't want to be associated with tragedy, and frankly, they didn't want to keep digging. It wasn't just fear, it was fatigue. You talk to the woman who now owns the art supply store Jessica used to visit. She remembers her. She always bought charcoal pencils. Even though she said she couldn't draw, you nod. Jessica liked the texture. She said once, the sound it made on paper. You still have one in a drawer somewhere? There's a kind of ghost that lives in small towns like this. Not the rattling chain kind, more like the kind you feel when you walk into a shop and forget what you came for. A memory without a body. A feeling that someone just left the room. Even though no one's been there all day, that's Jessica, now, and Elena, and the pieces of others you'll probably never know. And here's your odd tidbit for the night. In the late 1800s, a small town in eastern Oregon banned photography altogether. after a string of deaths they believed were connected to spirit exposure. They claimed cameras could trap fragments of souls. It was revoked in 1899. But for a while, no portraits were taken within town limits at all. You wonder what Jessica would think about that. In one of the final evidence boxes from Keller's storage unit, recovered after his sentencing, a folder of old receipt surfaces, gas station prints, a few coffee shop orders, one marked Cedar Hollow Market, dated the day Jessica vanished. There's a security camera log from the back of the store. Too grainy to be conclusive, but there's a shape, curly hair, a backpack. Maybe her, maybe not. The timestamp places her within 10 minutes of Cascade Ridge, still chasing shadows. But it brings you a kind of odd comfort to know she might have had one last normal moment buying snacks, choosing a bottle of water, briefly safe, briefly free. You attend a small ceremony held by a local advocacy group, Families of Women Affected by Unsolved Cases. It's quiet. Held in a church basement. Coffee in paper cups, muffins wrapped in plastic. You sit beside Elena's sister again. She places a folded photo in your hand. It's Jessica and Elena. Same shoot, same day. The agency had used both women in a car ad just months before Jessica disappeared. You hadn't known, you'd never seen that photo. They're smiling. Hands on the hood of a cherry red sedan. Light catches their eyes. That's when it hits you. The two victims once shared the same frame, long before they shared a fate, your historical fact. The earliest composite sketch in criminal history dates back to 1888. During the investigation of Jack the Ripper, and despite how far we've come since then, facial recognition, forensic linguistics, data mapping, sometimes it still comes down to someone sitting in a room, staring at a photo, and asking, where did it all begin? Back in Clearwater Bay, someone hangs a wind chime outside the old photo studio. You pass it once in late fall. It's rusted, slightly off-key, but it still makes a sound. You keep the photo, Jessica and Elena side by side, unaware. Sunlight flickers in their hair. Behind them, a jagged ridge peaks above the car hood. If you didn't know better, you'd call it picturesque. But now you do. Now every pixel feels like a bruise. You frame it, quietly. One evening after the baby, no longer a baby, has gone to sleep. He's 8 now, loves space documentaries and hates brushing his teeth. Doesn't ask much about his mom, not anymore. But sometimes he stares too long at old photos. Sometimes he asks why forests are dangerous. You never have a good answer. What haunts you most is the quiet overlap the two stories, side by side, like train tracks no one noticed were running parallel until both disappeared into the trees. Two different killers, same hunting ground. You wonder how close they ever came to crossing paths. You wonder if they passed each other on the road once, if they noticed, if they nodded, and that's what really chills you. The idea that predators might recognize each other like wolves do. David Keller never confesses, not fully, but during a psychological evaluation, he makes a strange comment. They always smiled. He says, that's the part people forget. They were happy, right up until... He trails off. You wonder if he means Jessica or someone else. And now we get to the part the documentaries always skip: the paperwork. The waiting. The way grief settles, not like a storm, but like dust. It doesn't shatter your windows. It seeps in, coats the blinds, hides in your cereal bowls. Years pass. You stop answering every call from an unknown number. You learn to smile when people ask how you've been. Clearwater Bay limps forward. The diner changes owners. The antique shop becomes a vape store. The forest doesn't change much, though it still looms, still rustles when you don't want it to, still holds names under moss. You drive past the Cascade Ridge entrance one morning, just to see. There's a new sign, some state initiative for trail safety. It says, stay together, leave no one behind. Nice idea, but someone always lags behind, always. Here's your odd tidbit tonight. In 1952, a small Oregon mountain town commissioned a sculptor to create a memorial statue of the unknown hiker, a tribute to all those lost in the woods. The sculptor, however, went rogue and designed it with a missing face, literally. Just smooth clay where eyes and mouth should have been. The townspeople were horrified. They burned it within a week. No replicas were made. Still, sometimes you think that's exactly the right face. Blank. Forgotten. Unfinished. The forest doesn't burn again, not like before. But in 2015, a dry summer sparks a blaze further up the ridge. Firefighters battle it for 5 days. Afterward, in the charred clearing, a rescue crew finds something odd: a melted lens cap. Fused to stone, they test it, match it to a camera model from the early 2000s. They never find the camera, but it reminds you that the forest remembers, even when we forget. Your historical fact tonight: the term cold case wasn't widely used until the 1980s. Before that, cases were simply inactive, as if justice could take a nap and no one would notice. Now, there are departments, task forces, algorithms, but in places like Clearwater Bay, cold still feels like cold. It just lives in the soil. You get a letter one day from the state. They've finalized Keller's record, confirmed link to the 2001 Morrow case. No appeals, no conditions. You fold the letter and slide it into a drawer. Right next to the scarf Jessica used to wear on foggy days, you can still smell her on it if you close your eyes. Cascade Ridge has a silence to it that doesn't feel natural. You visit once more, alone. It's mid-autumn. The trees are thinning, shedding crisp yellow leaves like memories. There's no particular reason to be here, no ceremony, no news alert, just a pull, a need to see it for yourself one last time. The parking lot where they found the scorched shell of Jessica's car is now covered in new gravel. There's a fresh trail marker nearby. It's white paint a little too bright. You sit on the hood of your car and listen. A squirrel rustles through underbrush. A raven barks once, then quiets. But the forest never really makes noise out here, not where the moss muffles your footsteps and the canopy seals everything in like a lid. It's not haunted, it's just tired. You walk the trail. Slowly, you follow the switchbacks, past the ridge's edge where hikers like to take selfies, past the overgrown turnoff where the search teams once roped off an area with fluorescent tape. There's nothing left now. Nature does what it always does. Covers, absorbs, forgets. But you don't, because you've walked through every possibility 100 times. And in one of those possibilities, Jessica said no, maybe to Keller, maybe to Brett, maybe to someone no one's ever named. She said no, and they didn't like that. You stop at the spot where they think her remains were found. There's no plaque, no marker, just a patch of uneven ground where ferns have grown back in clumps. You kneel, press your hand into the earth. It's damp and cold and stubborn. And somehow, she feels close here. You don't cry. Not this time. Not anymore. Back in town, there's a community bulletin board near the post office. Someone's posted a hand-drawn flyer, missing pets of Clearwater. It's covered in smiling dogs and fat house cats. You look at their faces and realize something odd. They all seem to be looking over your shoulder. That's your strange tidbit tonight. In 2010, a folklore archivist collected more than 40 distinct urban legends from coastal Oregon towns involving pets warning their owners of danger. Everything from refusing to go down trails to scratching open locked doors. The most famous involved a golden retriever that allegedly barked at a man moments before he was struck by lightning. Historians still argue whether these are just stories or examples of instinct we don't fully understand. You'd believe it? Honestly, there's too much that doesn't make sense otherwise. And now here's something else. A sheriff's deputy new to the department. Maybe 2 new calls you unexpectedly. She's been reviewing files, just trying to get a feel for old cases. She says she sounds young, hopeful, maybe still believes in neat endings. She asks if you remember anything about a second camera. You pause. There was something. One of Jessica's old emails. A photographer asked her to bring something casual, something bright, and your own camera. If you have one just for fun. You thought nothing of it at the time, but now your brain won't let it go. The email address is defunct, but the deputy says she's found a few other models who were told the same thing. The pattern's there. They were all told to bring cameras. The implication that they'd be shooting with the photographer, learning the trade, just a trick to lower their guard. Or maybe something else, because none of those cameras were ever recovered. And there's your history fact for this section. One of the oldest known photographs of a crime scene taken in 1847 was lost for over a century. It was rediscovered in an attic in Paris, mislabeled as mannequin study. Turns out, it was the body of a murder victim, posed for documentation. The earliest evidence can hide in plain sight when no one knows what they're looking at. You wonder how many of Keller's or Field's photos are still out there, on hard drives, in attic boxes, maybe on someone's Pinterest board. Someone might be looking at Jessica right now and not even know her name. That thought sticks with you longer than you'd like. You begin collecting. In secret, any local photo archive, any forgotten modeling blog. You scroll through blurry thumbnails late into the night. Your son asleep upstairs, the fan humming softly in the hallway. You're not sure what you're hoping to find. Maybe just proof that she was here, that she mattered. It starts with a shadow on a windshield. You're scanning through a digital archive of local promotional photos, old dealership flyers, tourism ads, things no one really notices when you freeze. It's a low-angle shot of a car, mid-2001, used in a Drive Oregon summer campaign. You almost miss it, but in the reflection of the windshield, there's a face. Not clear, not detailed, but there. Curly hair, a profile just turning. You lean in, screenshot, zoom, enhance. Not like in the movies, but manually. Pixel by pixel. It's her, has to be, Jessica, in the background of a car ad, probably not even supposed to be in the shot. Maybe walking by, maybe waiting her turn, but she's there. You contact the archive, ask where the photo came from. They trace it back to a freelance photographer, B. Keller, operating under Moonlight Northwest Visuals. Of course, you submit the photo to the police. They quietly add it to the case file. Now sealed and marked as closed, the prosecutor sends you a thank you note. You don't reply. There's nothing left to say. But there's something about seeing her there alive, unscripted, that hits harder than any court ruling. Because that moment, it's ordinary. She's probably thinking about whether her lipstick is too dark or whether she left the iron plugged in. She's not afraid yet. That might be the last photo ever taken of her. And it was hiding in a tourist brochure. It becomes a symbol for you, not of the crime, but of the in-between. The thin sliver of time when she still believes she was safe, before the notebook, before the fire. Let's go sideways for a moment. Did you know that in 1934, a photographer in upstate New York accidentally documented the last moments of a stranger's life? He was testing exposures near a lake when he captured a woman walking into the woods. She was never seen again. He didn't realize the significance until the photo surfaced a decade later in an unsolved case file. Historians still argue whether she ever existed at all, or if the image was doctored. Sometimes photos lie. Sometimes they testify. You return to the ridge once more, not to find anything but to leave something. A small stone, smooth, painted with a soft lavender swirl and her initials on the bottom. You place it beneath a crooked tree, one you think she might have seen. A tree bent not by wind, but by the slow, stubborn weight of snow. You say nothing. You don't need to. The forest understands silence. Back in town, there's a retired dispatcher who used to work night shifts. During Jessica's case, she remembers something odd. I too, Call logged, but never pursued. Heavy breathing. One word. Burning. She says, "We thought it was a prank. We were wrong." She retired in 2005, but she kept the tape. You listen once, and only once. It's just static, mostly. Then a rush of breath, then a word. Burning. Soft. Almost apologetic. It doesn't sound like Keller. It doesn't sound like Derek. It doesn't sound like anyone. You mention it to the detective. She tells you they can verify it. Can't use it. Can't do anything with it. But it stays with you. Your son asks one night if his mom had a favorite song. You play it for him, an old track from a Louisiana folk singer. Soft banjo. Slow tempo. The kind of song that sits with you. He doesn't say anything at first. Just listens. Then, she had good taste. You nod. She did. Want your fringe fact for the night? In the early 2000s, before cloud backups, some photographers stored their files on CD-ROMs in freezer bags, believing the cold would preserve data longer. A few of these frozen time capsules have resurfaced in estate sales. One, found in a Washington junk store, contained dozens of unpublished portraits, all of women who had never modeled again. Historians don't know who they were. You keep hoping one day you'll find another photo. Not for the case, not for the evidence, just to see her again. Maybe laughing, maybe mid-blink. Something imperfect, something real. Because after all the searching, the trials, the silence, that's what's left. the need for one more ordinary moment. You never expected them to share so many details? Not Keller and Derek. Not explicitly. But once the evidence settles and the transcripts pile high enough, patterns start to emerge. Similar words, similar setups, different men, different lives, but hauntingly aligned in execution. Jessica and Elena, different stories, same staging. Both were contacted under false names. Both were invited to remote photo shoots. Both were encouraged to bring personal items. Jessica, a notebook she never owned. Elena, a scarf that would later become one of the key identifiers at her grave. Both killers used the excuse of accidents. Both tried to hide them in the woods. Both claimed panic right up until the details unraveled. You lay the timelines side by side like old transparencies. And that's when you realize they weren't just similar, they overlapped. Derek Fields posted his first ad for freelance car shoots in 2002, less than a year after Jessica's case went cold. Keller went quiet in 2002, changed emails, shut down the trail of digital crumbs he'd been leaving behind. Then Fields appeared, almost like a continuation. Historians still argue whether this kind of behavioral mimicry is intentional or coincidental. In the 1970s, criminal analysts began studying signature transference, where offenders unknowingly imitate previous crimes they've read or heard about. But there's debate. Were Fields and Keller linked by exposure, or did they simply find the same holes in the fence? You remember reading a line in a true crime book once. Some predators learn not from each other, but from the silence that follows the first attack. Silence was abundant in Clearwater Bay. Back then, there were no central databases tracking freelance creatives, no permit requirements for independent shoots on forest land, no way to cross-check aliases. You could create a website in 10 minutes. You could vanish even faster. A quirky side note, in 2001, a Portland-based modeling agency accidentally published a list of over 400 unvetted photographers on its public directory. Many were real, some were not. No one knows how many women may have been approached by names that didn't belong to real people. The list was quietly taken down. No formal apology was issued. You talked to a criminologist once. She's writing a thesis on mirror predators. You sit in the back of her guest lecture. She maps out how opportunists sometimes become copycats, not out of admiration, but out of strategic adoption. If the first crime was ignored, she says, the second is often bolder. The forest doesn't just hide bodies, it teaches. You think of Keller's notebook ploy, then Fields' identical car shoot. You wonder who really came up with the idea. Did Derek hear whispers of Jessica's case and model his approach to blend in? Or was it just a tragically similar hunting method, drawn from the same diseased playbook? You'll never know. Both men denied knowing each other. Both lived in the region. Both preyed on women who were young, hopeful, and trusting enough to believe in second chances. There's a strange comfort in academic detachment, reading charts, watching behavior graphs, but none of it brings Jessica back. None of it scrubs away the fact that two men who might never have met made the same decisions with terrifying precision. You meet Elena's sister again. She's working with a nonprofit now. Something about creative safety guidelines, vetting procedures, photo shoot security tips. You sign the petition, so do a few hundred others. The sheriff's department finally puts up a permanent sign at Cascade Ridge. It's small, tasteful, etched into wood. In memory of those who never came home, you are not forgotten. It doesn't mention names, but you know who it's for. Your historical fact tonight. In 1932, the FBI first introduced the concept of the repeat offender matrix, a crude tracking system using paper files and colored thumbtacks. Despite advances in data science, many rural jurisdictions in the U.S. still operate without centralized suspect databases even in 2020s. So, technically, Derek and Keller never existed in the same system. They weren't flagged. They weren't cross-referenced. They were ghosts to each other, but not to you. Because now, they both live side by side in your memories. Not because they deserve space, but because their echoes shape the story. You never planned to speak at the vigil. You showed up to stand in the back, to listen, maybe to hold your silence alongside others. But when the microphone passed your way more out of politeness than expectation, you took it. Your voice shook. At first, you hadn't said Jessica's name out loud in a crowded room in years. But then, you found your rhythm. I used to think the scariest part was how she died. You said, now I know it's how long it took anyone to believe she was missing. The room was quiet. Even the coffee cups stopped clinking. Elena's mother came up after, hugged you with both arms, didn't say a word. That kind of silence says enough. The vigil was small, held in the Clearwater Bay Library community room, fold-out chairs, candles in plastic cups, a table of framed photos and little notes scribbled on index cards. Kind, dreamer, always laughed too loud. One card simply read, "She mattered." You took that one home. And you think now of all the people who never stopped, Jessica's mother, Elena's sister, the rookie detective who reopened the case with a hunch and a messy desktop full of PDFs, the archivist who flagged that windshield reflection, and you who never stopped tracing the lines, even when they led back to places that hurt. There's power in remembering. Here's a curious tidbit for tonight. During World War II, the British government commissioned artists to create portrait memories of missing soldiers based on witness descriptions and family letters. These weren't forensic sketches, they were emotional composites, meant to preserve presence. Some families kept them in place of official photographs. One woman said, "It's not exact, but it's how I remember him." That's how memory works. It blurs the lines, softens the angles. It keeps what you need. You find one of Jessica's old modeling prints in a folder you haven't touched since 2002. It's not her best photo, not technically. Her hair's a little frizzy, the lighting's too flat, but she's laughing at something off camera, real, unposed. You frame it. It replaces the charcoal pencil in the drawer. Your son, now nearly a teenager, asks if he can see the forest someday. You hesitate, but then you nod. Yeah, you say, but we'll stay on the trail. He grins. I'm not scared. You smile, but the words you're thinking are, you don't have to be. That's the dangerous part. Let's go historical again. Did you know that in 1980, the state of Oregon passed a resolution recognizing the role of citizen volunteers in solving cold cases? It was largely symbolic, no funding, no real policy, but it acknowledged something rare. Sometimes, justice depends on the people who refuse to move on. That's been you for years. But lately, you've started to let go, not of Jessica, never of Jessica, but of the weight. You find yourself humming her favorite song again. You start baking on weekends. You say yes when your son wants to go to the science museum. These are small things, quiet things, but they're yours. Elena's sister reaches out again, this time with something strange. An email thread. Someone had forwarded her a note sent from an old promotional modeling group forum, anonymous. No clear sender. It simply read, "I almost didn't get in the car, but I did. And I lived." No name, no date, no return address. But maybe there were others. Survivors who never said a word, who left the forest behind and never looked back. Maybe that's the final quiet miracle, that someone else saw the warning signs in time. Still, you wonder. Historians still argue whether evil is exceptional or just part of the landscape, whether certain places attract tragedy, or whether we just notice more when the trees are close and the stories can't escape. Cascade Ridge doesn't feel haunted anymore, but it does feel watched. And somehow, that feels more honest. There's a dusty map of Clearwater Bay at the Visitor Center. One of those weather-warped ones behind plexiglass with faded trail routes and cheerful star icons. You notice something. The spot where Jessica's car was found has been quietly renamed. It used to be marked as Lookout Point East Lot. Now it's just Trailhead 7B. No sign, no story. It's like they folded the horror into the underbrush. You understand why. Tourism dipped after the Keller trial. Families don't book cabins in towns where bodies turned up in ditches. Photographers moved their sessions inland. Sunset Ridge became Heritage Hollow, rebranding, a soft scrubbing of public memory. But people remember. A local coffee shop still displays a flyer about model safety. Someone left wildflowers by the trail entrance last week. You watch a family stroll past the ranger station. Their teenage daughter glances toward the woods. Then, back at her phone, The parents don't notice. You do? You wonder how many others walked that trail and came back. You wonder how many didn't. And now, here's your historical fact of the night. In 1955, Oregon passed a law requiring all state parks to log serious incidents, animal attacks, drownings, disappearances, but it didn't apply to national forests, which means Cascade Ridge, loophole, open secret. No formal requirement to acknowledge how many didn't make it back. Elena's sister is writing a book. You read her draft. It's rough, unflinching, no metaphors, just names, dates, quotes. She doesn't want it to be poetic. The poetry already failed them. She writes, "I want facts to stick where feelings slipped." Still, there's power in it. You underline one passage. "We teach girls how to smile for the camera. Maybe we should teach them what questions to ask before stepping into the frame." You visit her grave sometimes, Jessica's. It's simple, not neglected, not flashy, just a small headstone and a wind spinner that clacks gently in the breeze. You bring coffee, you talk like she's still around. Maybe she is. Tonight's fringe tidbit. A 1970s psychic claimed she could detect murder sites by listening to soil vibrations. She wore hand-sewn canvas shoes to avoid interference and spent most of her time near old pine groves. She helped solve exactly 0 cases, but her journals preserved in a regional museum describe Cascade Ridge as buzzing with sorrow. Make of that what you will. The wind shifts while you sit beside Jessica's grave. The spinner turns. A crow caws and flaps away. You think about Keller, about Fields, about the chance, however small, that there could have been a third. Police never found solid links to anyone else, but they didn't disprove them either. There were too many holes, too many unsent voicemails, too many vanished notebooks, and too many women who didn't get a news article. You keep looking. Not obsessively, not anymore, but you keep your ear open. You stay on a few forums, you know the search terms, and here's a thought you haven't said aloud before. If someone else had stepped forward sooner, someone like Chelsea, who finally spoke up about Keller, Jessica might still be alive. That kind of math never balances. Still, you don't get angry the way you used to. Not every day. Now, you focus on small things. Your son graduates 5th grade. He wins a science award for a volcano project. His teacher says he's observant like a detective. You smile, but your throat catches. You take him to the beach. You show him how to skip stones. You tell him about his mom. The real version, the one who burned toast, who danced to music she didn't understand, who insisted on carrying her own groceries even when they weighed more than she did. He laughs, and just like that, for a moment, the story shifts, not from grief to joy, exactly, but from silence to voice. You once thought you'd eventually forget the details, but you haven't. Not the way the notebook didn't match her handwriting. Not the voicemail that came too late. Not the way her coffee was still warm when you walked in that first afternoon. And yet, somehow the world had already started unraveling. Years pass, the edges blur. Sure, but the core stays sharp. It has to. Memory isn't just about holding on. It's about honoring what was lost before anyone else knew to start looking. You get a call from a university researcher in Eugene. She's compiling a study on rural procedural delay, how bureaucratic gaps stall justice in small communities. She asks if she can include Jessica's case. You say yes, but you ask for one thing. Don't simplify it. Don't turn her into a bullet point. She agrees. Sends you a copy of the chapter when it's done. The title, The Cases That Didn't Match and Should Have. In it, you find something that surprises you. A scanned page from a 2003 internal report. It mentions Jessica by name, but what jumps out is this sentence: possible link to previously dismissed arson event at Keller's prior address. No follow-up due to jurisdiction overlap. You read it twice. They knew not everything, but something. And still, the trail went cold. Historians still argue whether the decentralization of rural law enforcement was a necessary protection of local autonomy or a recipe for oversight. Disaster. The truth, like the woods, is tangled. You meet an old officer once, retired now. He apologizes, not for anything specific, just for not seeing it. We were trained to look for runaways, not patterns, he says. We thought bad things only happened in cities. But Jessica wasn't lost in a city. She was lost in a place where trees outnumbered people, and where believing someone disappeared on purpose was easier than admitting something darker lived in the forest. You don't blame him. Not exactly, but you also don't forgive. Forgiveness implies someone asked. The modeling agency Jessica worked with is long gone. The storefront is now a smoothie bar. Teenagers sit out front scrolling through phones. One of them is showing her friend pictures, snapshots, all sunlight and squinting. You pause. You want to say something, to warn, to share. But what would you say? So instead, you sit on a nearby bench and watch. Watch the light hit their faces. Watch them laugh. Watch them live. It hurts, and it heals. At the same time, your historical fact. In 1874, the concept of closure in criminal justice didn't exist. Victims' families were rarely consulted. Trials were fast, outcomes final. The idea that justice also belonged to the grieving, that it should feel like something only emerged in the late 20th century, which means, by that definition, most of the time, there was no closure, only continuation. Back at home, you start organizing your files. Jessica's comp cards, news clippings, court transcripts. You're not hoarding them anymore, you're preserving them. You start a document, a timeline, add captions. Maybe one day your son will want it, or maybe he won't. You include the weird details. 2. The voicemail, the photo reflection, the earring, the index card from the vigil. You include one line you've never written before. I still hear her laugh in small rooms. It's true. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, you pass the hallway and think you catch a chuckle, like someone remembering an inside joke. And now, your quirky tidbit for tonight. In 1991, a man in Idaho spent 15 years building a whisper museum, a collection of objects that he claimed still echoed the last words spoken near them. The entire project was debunked as performance art, but when asked why he did it, he said, "I wanted to believe that some part of people lingered something quieter than a ghost." You get it. You still have Jessica's scarf. You still have her voice on the answering machine from years ago. Don't forget the milk. You kept it by accident. Now it's sacred. You never forgot the milk. By the way, you used to think grief was a wound, but now it feels more like a landscape, quiet, familiar, always there when you turn around. Some days, the path is clear. Other days, you wander in circles, tripping over old memories like exposed roots, and yet you keep walking. Jessica's name doesn't come up much anymore in local headlines. The world has moved on, as it always does, but in quiet corners, online forums, advocacy circles, late-night support groups, her story still breathes. So does Elena's, so do others. Names you never knew when this all began. They're linked now, not by crime, but by memory, shared loss, stitched into a quilt nobody wanted to make. Elena's sister finishes her book. It gets a modest release paperback. Indie publisher, nothing flashy, but it spreads. A podcaster reads excerpts. A local paper runs a piece titled "The Forest That Didn't Forget." Your son asks if he can bring the book to school for a project. He says, you pause, then say yes. He comes home with a B+ and a note from his teacher. Sensitive material, but presented with maturity. Please tell your family thank you for sharing. And you feel it, for the first time in years. Something lighter, not closure, but maybe legacy. You visit the ridge one final time. It's mid-morning. The sun filters through the canopy like soft music. You bring a second wine spinner, nearly identical to the one at Jessica's grave. You plant it near that gnarled tree, half dead, half defiant. You whisper something, not because you think she hears it, but because you need to. Then you walk back to the trailhead, and for once, you don't look over your shoulder. Here's your final quirky tidbit. In 1983, a woman in coastal Maine planted wind chimes at the edge of every hiking trail she visited, claiming they caught memories on the wind. Some are still there today, rusted, warped, but when the breeze hits just right, they still sing. You like that idea? Jessica would have too. Historians still argue whether tragedy makes us wiser or just more cautious, whether we learn from loss or simply build better disguises around the same old fears. You're not sure, but you do know this. Jessica was kind. She was curious. She laughed with her whole chest and danced when no one asked her to. She mattered. And now, her story has been told slowly, quietly, honestly, the way stories should be. Word count 128. Wind down 300 words. So now, you let yourself slow down. Let your shoulders fall away from your ears. Let your breath deepen. Let the weight of all that memory shift, not disappear. Not erase, but settle like a stone in a stream, shaped smooth over time. The forest is still there, but it's quieter now. You picture it not as a crime scene or cautionary tale, but simply as a place where light filters through pine needles and wind moves through branches like soft whispers, where someone once walked laughing, hopeful, unknowing, and left behind echoes too gentle to ever really vanish. You remember her laugh? You hold it close. The story won't always ache like this. One day, it'll hum. Like the wind spinners, like chimes on a foggy trail, like your son's voice reading her name aloud for the first time. Not with pain, but with understanding. You made it through silence, through shadows, through the long walk back. Now you can rest. Close your eyes, breathe deeper. The forest will keep its secrets a little longer tonight. But you've told yours, and that is enough.